I think the number one answer to the question of how are you doing is what? Yeah, you're gonna say good, but oftentimes it's good, just busy, right? I mean, we're all busy. We often, let people know, I just got a lot of things going on. I'm just busy. I got this happening, all this kind of stuff. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard anybody ever say when they're asked the question, hey, how you doing? Good, I've got lots of margin in my life and I'm pretty rested up. Never heard anybody say that. In fact, you know this to be true, that if you were to say that, you'd be judged. Right? Like people would judge you. You're obviously lazy. If you've got margin or you're rested up, right? They would think you're lazy, or here's something that they would say, must be nice, right? I mean, if I said, right, if a pastor said, I've got, plenty of margin and rest because I'm trying to do this thing correctly and healthy and all that kind of stuff, you'd probably say, it must be nice to be a preacher. The rest of us got to work 6 days a week, something along those lines, because we're all so busy, our schedules are crammed. Let me ask, do you ever get tired just thinking of the things on your to-do list? I mean, just as you look at, for me, when I look at my Monday schedule and I'm like, oh man, not because of the people I meet with, because it's Wednesdays are ridiculously long. I start, I get up around 4:30 because we have our men's thing at 6, and then I have usually every other week an elders meeting, and then I disciple guys after that, so it's usually 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and so you're going from super early to super late, and you're just going, man, but there's parts of that I absolutely love, and it's life-giving, but you're just going, it's busy. And just thinking of your schedule sometimes can be crazy. Or maybe for some of you, you don't get enough work done during the week that you gotta bring it home on the weekend and find yourself working on the weekend. Is that how you ever experienced that? Right? Or maybe it's just super hard, or you feel guilty just trying to relax. That one doesn't, I can get past that one, but for my wife, she'll feel guilty. I'm like, sweetheart, just put your feet up, just relax. I can't sit still. There's always something, there's always a project, there's always something that she feels like she's got to do. Why? What is that? There's an editorial that said the world is too big for us. Too much going on, too many crimes, too much violence and excitement. Try as you will, you'll get behind in the race in spite of yourself. It's an incessant strain to keep pace, and still you lose ground. Science empties its discoveries on you so fast that you stagger beneath them in hopeless bewilderment. The political world is news seen so rapidly that you're out of breath just trying to keep pace with who's in and who's out. Everything is high pressure. Human nature can't endure much more. June 16th, 1833. See, this isn't a new problem, but it's a problem. We're all busy. We've got these crazy schedules, different things going on. Think about it, especially if you have kids and you have young kids. And I can remember when our kids were young. And again, this is pretty much your schedule. You get up in the morning, your alarm goes off, you get up in the morning, and then you go get your kids up, and then you got to feed them, you get them dressed, and then you got to get yourself taken care of. And then once you get yourself taken care of, then you're out the door, trying to make sure you get your kids there on time or get them to the bus stop, whichever it is, and you get them to school. And then after that, you got to head to work, and then you work all day, and either you got to go get your kids or you have somebody else, or it's the bus or it's childcare or whatever it is, and that happens. And then after you get done work, you go get your kids, and if they've got practices or they've got games or they've got clubs or they've got activities, whatever it might be, and then you go to that, and that'll take a few hours, and by the time you're done, now it's dinner time, and you're driving home, and you might stop someplace, but you probably have to go to Chick-fil-A because that's Christian, and so you go there and you shove some chicken down their throat, and you go home because you're on a budget and you can't afford to do that. And either way, you're like, grab a Pop-Tart, grab a cereal, I don't know, I'm exhausted. And then you take them to bed and you pray with them, you put them down, and then you look at your spouse and you're wiped out and you're exhausted and you go to bed. And guess what? You get to wake up tomorrow and do it all over again. It's insane. It's these busy schedules. And we can all relate to this, right? Overcrowded schedules, busyness, burnout, lack of rest. And we can feel so rushed, and we never carve time out for family, for fun, for rest. I mean, come on. How many times have you either said or you've heard other people say, man, if I just had a couple more hours in the day? Like, because 24 obviously isn't enough. Like God didn't know what he was doing when he only created 24. Like, we need more. Or you're going, man, if there was just 8 days, like if there were 8, we could get some of this stuff done. Right? I mean, we wrestle and we struggle with this stuff. And again, how many times, I remember a long time ago, and I was a youth pastor, and I was listening, this will tell you how long ago it was, I was listening to a tape in my car, and I was going down, and this guy said, listen, man, if you tell your spouse that, this is just a busy season, and then right after the season, you're gonna, you're lying. Like, you're lying to your spouse if you're saying, like, after this season is gonna let up. And that's what I would tell Sue all the time, like, because her love language is time spent, and she'd always be like, I just feel like you're always gone, and I feel like you're always at the church, and I feel like, you're always with other people, and I'm getting tired of getting the leftovers. And I'm like, okay, Sue, I'm telling you, man, it's just this busy season. It's camp, or it's mission trip, or it's program, or it's whatever. I'm like, after this season, I'm telling you, it'll get a lot less. And the guy's like, dude, stop it. You're lying to your wife. And I had no idea because, hey, you probably know this. What comes after the busy season? See, you're way smarter than I am. I really thought it would let up. It never did. It never did. It was always something else. And so here's what I want to help us understand this morning, because here's what's going to happen to you. As you're listening to what I'm talking about, and as you're hearing God hopefully speak to you through his word, our culture, and maybe even some of those idols that we talked about last week, could be accomplishment, could be success, could be a fear of failure, could be comfort, could be approval, whatever it is for you. So our culture, and maybe one of those idols, is going to collide with God's word this morning. And you're gonna have to choose. You're gonna have to make a decision who you're gonna listen to. So the question for you today is, who do you listen to? If you have your Bibles, I want you to open up with me to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20, as you're turning there, especially if you're a guest, I'm so thankful that you're here today, and I hope that you'll come back and keep asking more questions and you get to know us. There's a whole room full of people that are joining our church right now. It's so fun to just be able to talk with them for a few moments. But we hope that you'll get to the point where you can kind of connect with us and find out what we're about. But we've been going through this series called Family Matters. And we've been taking a commandment each week because we're going through the 10 commandments. The first week we talked about having no other gods before me. That's what God said, have no other gods before me. So we said the first thing is to put God first. And then we said that then the next week I talked about not having any idols, because it says no graven images, and he's talking about idols. And so we said, what does it look like to just worship God only? We talked about all these different things. And again, you can go online to sidelifechurch.com and you can go to our messages, and all that stuff's loaded up there. And then last week, Derek did a fantastic job of talking about taking God's name seriously. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. The power, the majesty of his name, and understanding what that really looks like. And so now we go to the fourth command. And what's so interesting, the next 6 commands after this week are about these relationships here. The first 4 are about these relationships right here. And so it's interesting to me that God places this fourth one right after those first 3, right before he goes into the 6 human relationship commandments. And the reason I believe that he does is because this command is all about upholding the first 3. And if we don't learn how to apply this command that we're going to look at today, we're going to have an incredibly difficult time honoring the first 3, and we're going to really struggle with the next 6. So let's look at it. Exodus chapter 20, let's start in verse 8. It says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. And again, as I've told the others, the alien is not right? It's not that kind of thing. We're talking about a foreigner, right? An outsider. It says, for in 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Now, you might notice that this is the longest commandment out of the 10 commandments. We probably just remember verse 8. It says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. So we remember that. But what he's talking about in these verses, the Lord's trying to tell us, here's the 3 things he's trying to tell us: what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to do it, and why, which is pretty awesome of God. What we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to do it, and why we should do it. So the first part is, what are we supposed to do? Well, he tells us in verse 8. And here's the very first word you should underline, highlight, star it up in your Bibles, whatever it is. It says, remember. Like, that word should jump off the page to you. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And this word remember actually has a double meaning. And so for the Israelites, it was a reminder that they had actually heard before. And I want us to look at that. So go back a few chapters to Exodus chapter 16. And as you're flipping back a couple chapters, God is telling the Israelites that I'm providing you this thing called manna. And it was like this bread-like substance that God created to provide, to care for them, to nurture them, to feed them. And he said, you can go out each day and take enough for that day. But then the next day, I'll provide enough for you for that day. And I don't want you taking extra, because if you have extra and you try to hoard it or save it or keep it for the next day, it'll rot. It won't be good for you. And so again, he said, now I want you to do that each day. I want you to go out, take the manna that you need for today. I'll provide enough for you today, and you do that. The next day, I want you to do the exact same. You can't save any for the next day unless it's the 6th day. On the 6th day, I want you to go get a double portion, because I don't want you working on the Sabbath. So I want you to grab enough for both those 2 days, the 6th and 7th day, and for that time you could gather multiple things. Look at this. Exodus chapter 16, verse 23. He said to them, this is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of rest, a holy Sabbath to your Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning. So they saved it until morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. Isn't that gross? But that's what had happened earlier in the week when they would have more than what they should. That's why he points it out. Verse 25, he says, eat it today, Moses said, because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any. So just imagine what the Israelites didn't do. The Israelites didn't obey, right? So God gives them really clear instructions. He says, listen, I want you to understand, this is what you do on this day. This is what I want you to do on this day. On the Sabbath, on the day before the Sabbath, you gather enough for both days. On the Sabbath, I don't want you going out and collecting any. And so what did they do? Sabbath day comes, they decide they're gonna go out. They're gonna go try to collect any. Well, there wasn't any, because obviously they weren't happy or content with what God had provided them. They wanted to get a jump on the week. They wanted to have a little stash to get ahead of their neighbors. They wanted to make sure that they were going to have enough so they wouldn't be hungry. And so look what God says. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day, he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where he is on the 7th day. No one is to go out. And again, you can see the Israelites knew about Sabbath before we even get to the 10 Commandments. They knew about it, but yet they're still disobeying. They're still disregarding what God has to say. And so God's saying, listen to me. I put this in place for your benefit. This is for you to be able to enjoy. This is for you to be able to get rest. I created this thing for you. Remember the Sabbath. You need to listen. So what's Sabbath? Come on, it's not a part of our vernacular, is it? I mean, it's not something where we constantly talk about, especially in Christian circles. I mean, outside of Christian circles, probably most people have never heard of it. It's not like you're gonna be at a bar talking to somebody like, hey dude, how's your Sabbath going, right? I mean, like, that's not happening. Even in Christian circles, it's not often talked about. You might have heard the word sabbatical or something like that, but rarely would you ever talk about Sabbath. So what is it? Well, we get the word from the Hebrew root word, which means to rest. That's what it means. Part of that word Sabbath means to rest. And so again, we see that God in Genesis 1 and 2, we see this start from the very beginning in the creation account. Listen to this, Genesis chapter 1, we'll drop all the way down to verse 31. It says, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. Chapter 2, verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Now notice, the word Sabbath's not even mentioned. Do you see it anywhere in that passage? The word Sabbath isn't even used, but it's clear that God was establishing a weekly sacred day off. Now let me ask you, was God tired? Was God exhausted? I mean, he was creating. So why in the world, if he wasn't tired and he wasn't exhausted, why in the world would God take a day off? Here's why. He loves you and I so much, and he knows our tendencies, and he knows what our tendencies would be. So he decided he was going to model for us a pattern of work and rest, because he knew we would need it. And so he sets this thing up because he loves us. But that wasn't the only reason for Sabbath. We see that the root word part of it was for rest. The other part of this root word means to celebrate. Check this out in Deuteronomy chapter 5. He says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. See, God knows that we have a huge need for rest. And he also knows that we're prone to forget. Like the natural thing for us, I mean, think about it back with the Israelites. All of a sudden, they're praying and pleading with God, God, please bring us out of this Egyptian slavery. Please get us out of this Egyptian slavery. And finally, God brings Moses, and he has him, brought out of Egypt, and he goes through the sea, and then God opens the sea, and they walk through it, and the Egyptians are coming after them. And once they get through, God brings the waters back, and he destroys the whole army. And all of a sudden, you could think, man, how powerful. It's even hard for me to believe that miracle. And you think back and you're like, man, how God consistently was just showing up in amazing, powerful ways and showing his majesty and power to the Israelite people. And shortly after, what are the Israelites saying to Moses? Take us back to slavery. It's so horrible. It's so bad. It's so hard. Wandering around. They had forgotten. Isn't it crazy? Not like we ever struggle with that, of course. How God can provide for us in all kinds of different ways, and it feels like, man, God, I don't even feel like I hear you. Like, I'm not sure I can do this, God. I'm not sure I can write that check. I'm not sure I can tithe. I'm not sure I can give this to this person. I'm not sure I can do this because you know what? I got to make sure I take care of me. God, I don't know if I can trust you. See, God knew our natural tendency to worship other things. And so he's going, listen, you need a day. You need a day a week where you're going to rest and you're going to be reminded that you're going to remember what I've done, how God has provided for you, how he saved you, how he delivered you from sin, how he's delivered you from living separated from him for eternity in hell. God's saying, listen, you need a day. You need to keep the Sabbath so that you can uphold those first three commands. You need to set aside a day so that there's no other gods, that there's no idols. And God, I remember the power and the majesty of your name. Like we need that time set aside. And that's why he's like, this isn't a one-time thing. This isn't an annual thing. This isn't even once a month. This is like once a week type of thing because we're so prone to forget. Like we really believe like we are the gods of our own schedule. And we forget that God is who he says he is, and we naturally will gravitate towards the idol of success or achievement or comfort or attention or approval or affection or whatever it is, because if I'm not getting it from God, or if I'm not getting it from my spouse, or if I'm not getting it from my employer, if I'm not getting it from my kids, if I'm not getting it from my parents, whatever it is, then I will gravitate towards somebody else because I need this, and I'll worship it and go after it. God's saying, listen, you need to set aside a day. You need to work hard for 6 days. And then you need a day of rest to rejuvenate and to remember and be reminded. See, when you remember, it's more than just reflecting back on memories. It's not like you're like, oh yeah, I remember that time. Like that's not what he's talking about. God's talking about this active remembrance that leads to obedience. It's an active remembrance that leads to just worship and praise and thankfulness. Like remember we said this? Remember when I brought you out of the slavery of Egypt. Like remember, like sit in that for, like who did that? Remember who opened the seas. Like remember who cured you from cancer. Remember who healed your marriage when you thought it was done. Remember what Jesus says when we take communion, the Lord's Supper. He says, do this in remembrance of me. So like when I come down, when we take communion next week, and when we do that together, and all of a sudden there's the bread and there's the juice, and all of a sudden we're reminded of like my sin, the grossness of my sin caused Jesus to go to the cross because it was that kind of payment that it was going to take for God to reconcile me and redeem me. And so Jesus took it upon himself. And so that bread that represents his body that was broken for me, that the juice that represents his blood, that was like, remember this. Like, don't ever forget this. I don't want this to become a ritual for you. I don't want it to be a check the box because everybody else is doing it. Like, remember. Like, set a day aside and remember. Which should cause us to worship, which should cause us to celebrate and be thankful and have an attitude of just appreciation and gratefulness for all that God is doing and has done. I mean, think about it. If you treated your anniversary, when we say, hey, don't forget to remember your anniversary, if you treated your anniversary like you do your Sabbath, your marriages would be in the tank. Your spouses would be really, really hurt, right? I mean, think about it, because, when we say remember in the Sabbath, you're like, yeah, man, but I'm busy. I got stuff to do. But what about remembering your anniversary? If you said, yeah, sorry, sweet, I'm busy. Yeah, you're not going to live long. I'm just going to tell you that up front. It's not going to last. It's not going to be good, right? There are things, what do we have to do when we remember? Remember isn't going, oh, yeah, I remember. July 18th, 1992. It's a good day. You look beautiful, Sue. Appreciate you marrying me. All right, what are we having for dinner, right? I mean, like that's not gonna fly. Remembering involves dinner. Remembering involves flowers. Remembering could involve jewelry. Remember, my wife's not in here, so I can say all this stuff and get you guys in trouble. Remembering could involve, depending on the year, a vacation. Remembering could be all these kind of things. What is it? Remembering is saying no to really good things so that you can say yes to this special spouse of yours. Remembering says no to lots of things that you just naturally pull at my time so I can say yes to the most important relationship on this earth, which is my spouse. See, that's what remembering does. It says no to these things, even though they're good and important, to say yes to her. Remembering the Sabbath day is saying no to really important things so that you can say yes to God, that you can remember who he is and who you're not. You can remember who should be on the throne and who shouldn't be. Remembering is honoring and celebrating, and it leads to this soul rest as well as physical rest. But he calls us to remember. And then the rest of verse 8 says, by keeping it holy. So what's it mean? Does it mean, do we worship a day? No. The literal word holy means to be set apart. That's what it means, to set apart. So what God's saying is set apart a day, a week, to rest and to celebrate God. That's what he's talking about. Sounds easy. It just isn't. So how in the world do we do this? So this is what we're called to do, but how do we do it? Listen to this. Verse 9, go back to Exodus 20. Verse 9, it says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to your Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, your son, your daughter, and your manservant, your maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. So God's saying that, listen, here's the model, here's the pattern. 6 days you work, 1 day you're off. 6 days you work, and then you rest one. Maybe it's 5 at your job, 1 at home, and then 1 day you rest. So just look at your calendar and look at your priorities. Where do you fit all this stuff in? You got work, you got school, you got projects around the house, you got date night, you got small group, working out, hobbies. I don't know what yours are. It could be a sports league. It could be like mine are golfing, hunting, fishing. I don't know what yours is. It could be reading. It could be a number of different hobbies, whatever it is. You got to put that in there. What about your kids' games? What about their practices? What about their clubs? What about their activities? What about all those different things going on at their school? Small group, I mentioned that. Quiet time. When are you going to fit that in? What about rest? What about worship? What about prayer time? What about serving? What about sleep? Oh yeah, I got to fit that in. All right? Listen to me. If you don't purposefully set apart a day and choose to honor the Lord and get rest, I'm telling you this is what's going to happen. Then everything that you didn't get done during that week, it's going to creep in to the day that you set aside. It's going to happen. Right? Like if you say, okay, Lord, I'm going to give you this day, it's going to be this day, specifically this day. Let's just say it's Sunday. And guess what? You have a busy week and things didn't get done. And you had to work extra and you had to bring things home or you had to stay at the office later or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden, next thing you know it, you're having to work on Sunday. Same's true with tithing, isn't it? Interesting how this works. How God, I want to honor you. I want to be faithful to you. God, I'm going to choose to give my best right out of the bat before I take care of my bills. I'm going to tithe. I'm going to sacrificially give, and I'm going to set this part aside. I really want to mature in this area. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, good. I'm going to do this. Now let me take care of my bills. Okay, I got this, and 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 I got this. And you're like, man, that's a big chunk of money that I could really use to take care of this stuff. And all of a sudden, what you had set aside is now going to creep over here because lifestyle happens. Choices happen, things that you didn't expect happen. Car breaks down. Kids, their teams just sent you another letter that you owe more money or you need more of this. Or you got to travel. You got to do this, whatever it is. Next thing you're like, God, listen, thank you for your grace. Thank you for your forgiveness. I'm going to lean on that next month. I'm going to really try hard. God, I really want to try. Why? Because it creeps over. And next thing you know it, God, I need you to fund my lifestyle. I'll get back to you another time. I'm going to be brutally honest with you. I am terrible at trying to apply this. Like I couldn't find anybody else to preach this message, so I had to do it. No, actually, I wanted to preach this because I need to deal with this in my own life, to be honest. In fact, this past weekend, last weekend, Seth and I, my youngest son, we had an opportunity. We had an opportunity to go to Pittsburgh to watch the football game on Monday night, and he left his friends and our church and all that stuff his junior and senior year to come out here with us. Our other 3 had already graduated and so forth, and that's a big sacrifice. And I knew one of my brothers had to do the same thing, and he really resented my dad for that. And I never wanted to do that to any of my kids. And so I was like, oh man, I said, all right, buddy, listen, before you graduate, I promise you I will take you to a home Steeler game. Well, this is his senior year, and there's only so many games in the fall, and I'm like, oh, I gotta make this happen. And so we went up there, and it was an incredible experience for both of us. But Monday morning, I'm just spending time studying and writing this message. And so we go to lunch, and he's like, so Dad, what's God teaching you? And I said, man, God's just rocking me right now. He's like, really, on what? I said, on this whole thing of Sabbath. I said, man alive. I said, I struggle so deeply to keep this. And I said, son, I said, we've tried to disciple you kids, and we've tried to implement and model and all those kind of things. And I said, we did a terrible job with this, and I'm really sorry. I said, Mom and I have to figure this out, and I'm sorry that I didn't do a better job of modeling this for you. I said, but it's going to be really, really important that you figure it out. And I hope that over these next, months and so forth, we can try to course correct in some respects. But I'm here to tell you, I don't have this figured out. I just know I have to do it. Not out of have to in the sense of I'm scared, but have to because I love my God. And he designed this for my benefit. And he knows what's best for me, and I'm disobeying him when I don't. And I can justify it all day long, but at the end of the day, we have to deal with this. So the question is, how do we do it? And that's what you've got to figure out, just like I have to. But I want to give you a little understanding of the why. Because what we've done is we've taken, because your temptation is going to believe that this message is culturally not relevant. You're going to think it's not culturally relevant because you're like, man, you just don't understand and my schedule and all this kind of stuff, and I get it. But this is relevant to all times, to all cultures. There's certain things in Scripture that application-wise, it's relevant, but in that moment, it was for a specific people for a specific time. This is for all people for all time. And so what happens is we've either neglected it altogether, right? Or we've become so legalistic in our approach and so rigid, you've missed the point. You've become like a Pharisee. And so what happens is the Pharisees, I don't know if you know this, the Pharisees added 1,500. Do you realize this? 1,500 rules to what God set in place, all his laws. God set up these laws, and then the Pharisees obviously didn't think God put enough in there, so they added 1,500. Let me just give you a little idea of what some of these are. This is not a joke. I didn't make this up. But one of them is, if your ox, because I know many of you have one, if an ox fell in a ditch on the Sabbath, you were allowed to pull it out. But if you fell in the ditch on the Sabbath, you had to wait till the next day. Come on, you know what's going to happen. Your spouse is going to go, boop. See you tomorrow, But anyway, so isn't that crazy? What happens, if you had a hen and they laid eggs on the Sabbath, you couldn't eat those eggs because the hen worked. That's crazy. What about a fly? Yeah, here's one. A fly is gnawing at you or buzzing around your ear and you're trying to get it out of the way. And right, if you start trying to do that or kill the fly or try to, get it to stop or smack it, you would go against the commands because they would say that's considered hunting on the Sabbath. So you just have to let it gnaw at you and irritate the tar out of you the whole day, right? It's crazy. And again, you're probably going, well, what in the world can we do? Like, what is it that we're allowed? Can I watch TV on Sunday? Can I throw a football with my son on the Sabbath? Can I go to a restaurant because they're working? Can I eat the food that they're using? You might as well not come to church because, hello, I'm working, right? I mean, can I fly out on Sunday or should I have to do it on Saturday if I have a meeting on Monday, but then I lose more time with my family? Can I play Monopoly or do I only have to play Bible trivia games? I mean, like what are we allowed to do? Like, how do we do this? And since God rested on the seventh day, does it always have to be on Saturday, but we go to church on Sunday? What would it be? I mean, how do we do all this? And again, God set the pattern and the example. Work 6 days, take 1 day off for rest and to celebrate God. It could be Saturday, it could be Sunday, it could be Wednesday, whatever it is. Just set aside a day. The Jews would celebrate the Sabbath because on Saturday because that was the seventh day of the week. The early Christians, right? The early Christian church, the reason we meet on a Sunday is because Jesus resurrected from Sunday. So they took the same idea of Sabbath and they put it on Sunday because Jesus resurrected on a Sunday and they wanted to honor him on a Sunday. And so that's why churches have met for years and years and years and years on a Sunday. Whatever it is for you. He's saying, listen, this is the Lord's day, celebrate it. And the reason it's dangerous to have universal application is that we will be prone, just like the Pharisees, to become legalistic. And again, the whole idea is it's not about asking all and figuring out the loopholes, right? I mean, that's like when teenagers used to ask me all the time, they're like, well, how far is too far? Like they want to know sexually, like how far can we go? Here's what you're doing. You want to know how close can I get to sin without crossing the line? Like that's what I want to know. It's the wrong question because what we do, we start drawing lines on other people's bodies. Like, can I go here? Can I go here? Can I go here? And when I looked at guys that want to date my daughter, I said, you could draw a line anywhere, right? But listen to me. When we start saying, what is it can we do? We're looking at what can we get away with? How much can we do? How much can we get away without being in sin? And you're missing the point. Jesus wanted to make it clear. To everybody, the Sabbath is for your benefit. Listen to this. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. But he reminds us it's not about us. He goes, so the Son of Man, talking about Jesus, is Lord, even of the Sabbath. The primary reason we come here to worship is not for you to get fed. So when people come and say, well, man, I don't go to that church anymore because I just didn't get fed. Listen to me. The primary reason you come to worship is not for you, it's to worship God. Period. Period. It's all about him, not about you. The second primary reason that we come to church is to benefit the rest of the church body. If you have kids, somebody's watching them, somebody's serving them, somebody's caring for them. It's not childcare back there, by the way. They are people that highly invest in your children. Their skills, abilities, talents are a gift to you as parents. Just last hour, we had a ton of teenagers in this room over there that most of you wouldn't even want to get close to, right? Middle school students, it's not because they're scary, but you must like strict, but guess what? There's leaders in there that love it. Love it. Why? Because they're using their gifts and talents to benefit the body. And as we have more and more people, we need you to use your gifts, talents, and abilities to serve the people that are going to be coming. That's another reason. And the third reason is to get your spiritual batteries recharged. There is a piece of being fed, but it can't be the primary piece. The primary piece is to worship God. It's not about us. I need to wrap it up. I want you to listen to this verse, and I'm going to close. Because as I read this verse to myself, it's almost like it's a big exhale. I want you to read this. I want you to listen to this as I read it. This is Jesus. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. Whether that's work, whether that's in your marriage, whether that's with your kids, whether that's with school, whether that's in relationships. But all you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. And take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Come on, let me ask. Is your soul at rest? Is there peace? Or do you find yourself anxious, frustrated, and nervous, and scared, and afraid, and worried? God's going, come on, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. I'll give you rest, but you got to do it my way. Mark 8 says, what good is it for a man to gain the whole world yet forfeit his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? So here's the question, and then we're going to close. Do you want God's best in your life? Do you want God's favor and his best? Then you gotta be willing to trust him and do what he says and not ignore his command like the Israelites, but yet still expect his blessings. I've got to choose to humble myself and say, God, I need you to not only be the Lord of my schedule, the Lord of my life, which means I have to trust you with all that has to get done. So the question is, will you trust him? Let's pray. God, thank you. Thank you for your word. Thank you for your kindness. Because it feels like a 2x4 at times, to be honest. But the fact that you do it with incredible gentleness, and unfortunately, this isn't the first time. You've done it through numerous surgeries. You've done it through other people in my life. You've done it through times where I've just been in a lot of pain. And you bring me back to this of like, Bob, what's it gonna take for you to slow down and for you to listen to me? And God, I just confess before you and all these people here, it's just sin. And I'm wrong. And I have to own it. And I'm so sorry that I've chosen busyness and all the other junk over obeying you. And I need to figure this out. And so God, I pray and I ask for your forgiveness. And Lord, I pray for strength. I pray for courage. I pray for faith. I even pray for creativity and unity with my wife as we try to figure this out and figure out what does applying this look like in our lives, because I really, really want this in my life, and I want to model this for my family a whole lot better than what I've done. So God, as a church, help us be really clear that we don't want to crowd people's schedules with lots of things, but we want them to be freed up to obey you and to really be rejuvenated through relationship with others. So God, thank you for your word. We love you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.